be done. Progress has happened here. And in just 4 days, ambitious legislation was passed that invests in core priorities and continues to innovate the way that our government operates in the face of this global pandemic. We assisted school districts across the state as they adapt to the COVID-19 crisis, providing remote learning authority, modifying graduation requirements to help students adapt, and altering the licensure requirements so our future teacher pipeline we've been working on so hard can continue to build and isn't cut off because of changes in classroom learning. We ensured that hospitals across the state received $3.8 billion across the life of the hospital assessment program so that they can care for all Illinoisans, especially in under-resourced communities hit hardest by COVID-19. We established stronger protections for those on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, increasing unemployment eligibility and expanding workers' compensation protections to many more workers with a landmark bipartisan agreement between business and labor. We protected voters against the greatest health challenge of our lifetimes, making it easier for people to exercise their power with the most basic and important right in a democracy, their right to vote. We finalized a funding mechanism to put people to work building infrastructure in this difficult economy by allowing a Chicago casino to be built. Some of the proceeds from that will fortify the underfunded Chicago pension plans. This is a long-awaited accomplishment that saw bumps in the road and eluded a number of administrations over decades, and it finally happened in the middle of a pandemic. And thanks in part to Senator Dick Durbin and Senator Tammy Duckworth and our congressional delegation in Washington, we're able to provide real, meaningful relief for those most impacted by the economic devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic, giving us some of the tools needed to support our working families, our small businesses, our child care providers, our local governments, and our healthcare providers. We're directing $500 million to rental and mortgage assistance, focusing on areas disproportionately hit by COVID-19, and we're focusing it on downstate too, as well as utility help and homelessness prevention. We have directed over $670 million to preschools, K-12 schools, and higher education to address the challenges of adapting our learning environments in the months ahead. Small businesses across the state will receive $636 million in grants, ensuring that communities in every region of Illinois receive dollars they need to build back the local economies that they cherish. And of that, $260 million in grants will be given to child care providers, including a minimum of $70 million going to child care providers in counties that did not receive direct assistance from the federal government. Healthcare providers who have been on the front lines of this COVID crisis will get $800 million in stability payments. That includes federally qualified health centers, ambulance and medical assistance providers, and long-term care providers such as nursing homes. For months now, medical professionals at these facilities have given their all to battling COVID-19. This funding will help them keep their businesses running on the other side of this pandemic. Contact tracing and testing programs are a high priority so we can keep workers and families safe and reopen our economy. So we've dedicated over $900 million to manage this expanding effort over the next year at the Illinois Department of Public Health. And $250 million will go to support the local governments outside of Cook and the Collier counties that the federal government didn't already directly fund in their COVID-related necessary expenditures, because no local community has been immune to the devastation of this moment. All of that support will be critical for Illinois as we begin to restore our workforce and recover. But make no mistake, these are just our first steps forward in what will be a long and difficult journey. Last year, my first as governor, I worked with the General Assembly to pass a balanced budget that invested in schools, job creation, infrastructure, human services, public safety, the things that make us strong in the long run, all while trimming some state operations and bringing efficiencies to help us stay within our fiscal means. My second budget plan I put forward in February for fiscal year 2021 continued down that path of working toward a surplus so that we could pay down debts that predated my term in office. But this virus has blasted a hole through estimated incoming revenues for not just Illinois, but for the 50 states across the nation. The budget the General Assembly has sent to my desk acknowledges that massive economic disruption leads to difficult decisions. This budget, which cuts about $1 billion from the original proposed budget and holds spending to last year's level in almost all areas, begins to address the financial upheaval that we're facing, but unfortunately, more hard choices about how to spend and save these dollars remain to be made. And those choices will have to be made along the way as we deal with the unpredictable nature of COVID-19. Though I'll say again that even in the most challenging of circumstances, this administration will never balance a budget on the backs of our working families and our most vulnerable. And many decisions in the coming year will be made based upon how best to reduce the infection rate and save lives. And I will continue to advocate for a national program to help state and local governments restore revenues taken away by COVID-19, revenues that fund our children's schools and public hospitals, that pay for the salaries of our teachers and our first responders, that support families that are hurting from the virus's devastating effects on their health and their jobs. Just as there was assistance to help the biggest businesses and corporations during this crisis that came from the Congress, assistance that only the federal government has the power to offer, there must also be unrestricted support for states and counties and cities who are on the front lines of helping working families and our most vulnerable citizens. This is an essential investment for all the states. States like Illinois that pay more to the federal government than we get back from them every year, as well as states like Indiana, Missouri, and Maryland that benefit from federal largesse. Democratic-governed states and Republican-governed states are in the same position. New York needs this. Texas needs this. Georgia needs this, Florida needs this, and so does Illinois. Because this is the moment that government is here for, to be there for people who are in need, people who are falling through the cracks, working families that need a little help getting back on their feet. This is not the time to bulldoze the very structures that support our healthcare systems and schools, clean water and clean air, greater public safety, job-creating small businesses, care for our most vulnerable children and seniors. In a moment when our workers and our businesses are struggling to get back on track, we have to ensure that our governments are there to back them up. Today, I'm glad to be joined by guests representing all corners of our state. Rob Carr, the President and CEO of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, Brad Cole, Executive Director of the Illinois Municipal League, Karen Kahn, CEO of Kahn's Hospitality Group, and Fontaine Crucial, owner of Major League Barbershop here in Springfield. These individuals standing with me represent just a few of the industries that are reopening after next Friday. In every aspect of our pandemic response, and especially as we begin to safely reopen meaningful swaths of our economy, our number one priority must be the health and safety of our workers, our customers, and Illinoisans at large. To that end, today, I'm announcing my administration's industry-specific baseline guidance for businesses that can open their doors under Phase 3. That includes retail, offices, service counters, personal care businesses, manufacturing, some health and fitness centers, youth sports, campgrounds, outdoor recreation operations, summer programs, and restaurants and bars for outdoor dining. You can find guidance in all of those industries at the DCEO website. That's our Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity website. In order to cover as many unique aspects of industry as possible, my administration collected input from hundreds of industry participants, from organizations like the Illinois Retail Merchants Association and the Illinois Manufacturing Association, to large Illinois corporations like Illinois Tool Works and Fortune 500 companies, to small family businesses, to park districts and hospitals, to regional economic development agencies like the Rockford Area Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Quad Cities Chamber, to elected officials and labor leaders, all while ensuring that businesses owned by women and people of color, many of which have faced structural barriers in accessing federal aid programs, had a significant seat at the table. From there, we took their questions and suggestions and shaped them into a guiding framework that prioritizes public health in every aspect of workplace operations. In sum, these recommendations reflect the questions and ideas brought to us by businesses of every size, background, and region in the state and by their workers, and prioritize public health as our guiding light. You can't build a strong economy if people aren't comfortable being a part of it. So while these protocols are customized by industry, they all share the same goal of helping employers and workers and customers feel and actually become safe and have evidence in protocols as more businesses open their doors. Have confidence in protocols as more businesses open their doors. That includes guidelines on how to operate with social distancing, regular sanitizing and cleaning, support for vulnerable workers, on-site signage, and of course, the use of face masks. Remember, along with appropriate social distancing, wearing a mask or a face covering is likely the most important thing that we can do for our public health as we restore parts of our everyday lives. I want to be very clear. The virus is still out there. The vast majority of people are not immune, and the risks of mass spread that we faced before we ever had a stay-at-home order remain if we don't do something different now than we were doing before the virus arrived. And that means covering your face and maintaining some distance. It's really that simple. Many individual businesses and specific associations have already developed more stringent guidelines of their own. That's welcome. Extra layers of support and protection are a good thing for everyone. I want to encourage all businesses, however they operate, to seek to accommodate workers who are more vulnerable to COVID-19. Limit travel unless absolutely essential. Assign extra space to your staff and implement on-site health screening procedures. Moving to the next phase of Restore Illinois is a big shift for businesses, and while many are eager to move forward, nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to move backward. So we must consistently watch the data and follow the guidance and the science as it's updated for the latest discoveries. To that end, we're making available a number of resources to our Illinois business community to help them implement new safety guidelines to protect their workers, their customers, and the communities they serve. Local officials, business owners, and anyone interested in reviewing these guidelines should visit DCEO's website. Also there, you'll find business toolkits. These include useful resources for implementing new safety guidelines, including reopening checklists, signage, training, and other essentials. So I thank you. I thank all of you for coming out here on a Sunday morning, just after the very late night of the legislature last night, and I want to turn it over to the President and CEO of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, Rob Carr. Rob?
Thank you, Governor. Good morning. IRMA's members represent 23,000 retailers, large and small, across Illinois. And retailers have demonstrated their commitment to safety throughout this pandemic by pioneering many of the new health guidelines to protect workers and the communities they serve, while ensuring shoppers have access to items they need. Though some stores like grocery stores, pharmacies, and hardware stores have operated continuously through this crisis, many other retailers were required to close their doors and are understandably excited to once again be able to welcome customers beginning Friday. While these guidelines present some challenges operationally, we appreciate being able to provide some input in the development of these guidelines. The real test, I think, will come in the application by local health departments and their willingness to apply these new guidelines uniformly, consistently, and with common sense. By the science, there's no reason for locals to go beyond. On behalf of the members of IRMA, we thank Governor Pritzker and Dr. Ezike for their commitment to the citizens of Illinois, and personally, I'll continue to pray for their wisdom and discernment as they navigate this crisis on all of our behalves. So again, Governor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I haven't done this before. It's now my pleasure to introduce Karen Kahn of Kahn's Hospitality Group. My apologies, Karen.
Good morning. As a result of the pandemic, restaurants, like the rest of retail, have been devastated. Many business owners, through no fault of their own, are seeing their family investments evaporate and their employees suffering. From those that have survived thus far, the future is far from certain. That desperation and the heartache that accompanies it has some clamoring simply to go back to normal, but normal is not on the horizon. As an active member of the Central Illinois hospitality community, which includes operating restaurants in Springfield and in Peoria, I know how important it is to go about reopening deliberately and safely. While I want to ensure the continued success of Kahn's Hospitality Group, it will not come at the risk of my employees or the communities that support us. I'd like to thank the Governor Pritzker and his team for involving us in the development of these new rules, which we will be allowed to incrementally reopen our restaurants on May the 29th. And with that, we at Kahn's Hospitality Group, as well as the hospitality industry, look forward to serving you soon. And now I'd like to welcome Fontaine Cruchot.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Fontaine Cruchot, the owner of Cruchot Cuts and Styles, formerly known as Major League Barbers, located in Springfield, Illinois. As we all remember, on March 15th was the day that the state of Illinois was forced to implement a statewide shelter-in-place order and business lockdown to ensure the community safety due to the coronavirus pandemic. A few weeks ago, several small business owners representing the health and beauty industry, such as barbershops, hair and nail salons, came together to explore and discuss the safety guidelines that could aid the safe and reopening of our businesses. After vigorous data research and analyzation in concert with public professions, I am excited to announce that these businesses will be included in the Governor's Phase 3 of reopening beginning Friday, May 29th. Governor Pritzker listened and understood our concerns and met our safety needs as we need to reopen as businesses that meant so much to us, our families, and communities as soon as possible. I would like to once again thank Governor Pritzker for his extraordinary leadership during this pandemic. I know it was a very difficult time for all of us in businesses and individuals. However, with his steady leadership, he has helped save many lives at the end of the day, which I hope that we all can agree was the most important agenda during this pandemic. At this time, I would now like to introduce Mr. Brad Cole.
Can you just spell your first and last name, please?
Fontaine Cruchot is Fontane. Last name is Cruchall, Krushall.
You want to say your business name too, so he knows?
Yes, it's Crucial Cuts and Styles. It's formerly Major League Barbers. Thank you.
A little free advertising.
Good morning, I'm Brad Cole with the Illinois Municipal League. On behalf of the cities, villages, and towns of Illinois, I'm pleased to join our friends here today, especially with the Illinois Retail Merchants Association and others, to discuss how these new guidelines will assist municipal leaders, business owners, and employees toward implementing a transition into Phase 3 of the Restore Illinois plan. While all of us are focused on maintaining the health, safety, and welfare of our residents, we are equally focused on returning to an active, meaningful economy and positive interpersonal social interactions. As I have said in previous briefings, this virus has taken a considerable toll on those who have suffered illness and those who grieve the loss of loved ones. Those difficulties cannot be adequately explained. It has also been extremely difficult on the local officials who have been tasked with fulfilling and enforcing the stay-at-home orders, all of whom have done their jobs to represent their specific communities. As we continue to see positive movement in the number of COVID-19 active cases, we are hopeful that additional steps like these today can be taken again soon. Moving from Phase 2 to Phase 3 later this week, and then moving into Phase 4 and Phase 5 thereafter is critical. It is critical not just for the obvious reasons, but also to reassure the public that progress is being made and that a return to normalcy is approaching within grasp. The guidelines for expansion of the Phase 3 opportunities outlined today are a good first step. Having said that, as has been reported and talked about widely, many municipal leaders would like to go even further. So we will continue to work with you, Governor, by offering thoughtful suggestions and constructive ways to expand and improve upon the recovery plan, while doing so in conjunction with public health officials. We will do that with a spirit of cooperation and understanding that many local officials have been placed in a no-win position, in the middle of either defying their constituents or disregarding state orders. The ongoing challenge to all of us is to work together, and the mutual commitment to that process is appreciated. Thank you, and I'll return Governor Pritzker to the podium for questions.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Brad.
Mike, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to...
Sorry, I just have a few, just a note before we get started, Mike. As the Illinois Emergency Management Agency announced on Friday, the members of the Illinois National Guard supporting our COVID-19 response, many of whom have been working every single day over the last 2 months, will be getting Memorial Day off, finally. Our 10 state-run drive-through sites, which the Guard staffs, will be closed on Monday, Memorial Day, tomorrow. Out of respect for the holiday, my administration will not hold our daily press conference tomorrow, returning at our normal time on Tuesday. Though many Memorial Day traditions look different this year, I do hope that everyone is able to take a moment this weekend to honor our veterans and military families, and especially those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, the nation that we all cherish so much. In all times, and especially in this fight for our collective health, may we share their faith, their commitment, and their willingness to love their fellow American as they love themselves. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions. Mike.
Hello, Governor. Mike Militich, the Quincy Media Capital Bureau. Just want to start off today. This budget keeps funding flat for schools and universities. This was a big talking point last night. It gives lawmakers a pay raise, and several people are concerned about that. How can you tell Illinoisans this was the right move?
Well, as you know, actually, the appropriations bill does not have those dollars in it. So even though the budget seems to have it in there, it was taken out, I think, maybe perhaps both in the BIMP and in the appropriations bill. So I do not think that legislators will, in fact, get a raise this year.
We'll follow up in the following weeks because some lawmakers still think that's there.
Some do, but I have to say I've spoken with several, including Heather Staines, including Senator Menard, and others who seem to feel that, no, they managed to get that out of it and took care of it either in the BIMP or the appropriations. I have to tell you that at least when I heard it at 11 o'clock last night, I don't think I recall which one of those bills.
Okay. The cocktails to go bill received bipartisan support in both chambers, and a lot of people are already posting about it on social media that they're really excited to see this and how it can be implemented to help those businesses. But others just said this morning, why don't you open the bars and restaurants now as soon as possible?
Yeah, well, as you know, we did open outdoor seating. We tried to do everything that we could that the epidemiologists and the doctors have told us that we can for restaurants and bars. I realize there is a push and pull here and I very much want to get businesses going again of all sorts. So when I'm told by the experts that one of the challenges is indoor seating in bars and restaurants, I have to listen to that. I'm looking for ways and talking, in fact, to the epidemiologists about how we can let even small numbers of people, even if I know that it would make a big difference for Karen's business and others, if we could let even a small percentage of the normal capacity into the doors inside and not just outside. So we're going to keep working on that.
The emergency proposal that would have given relief to renters and homeowners failed to get enough support from the General Assembly. Advocates are saying today thousands may end up homeless once this COVID-19 moratorium is lifted because of lobbyists in the real estate industry. What will you do to make sure these families will be able to keep their homes? This is a big concern.
It is a big concern, and as you know, I've already done quite a lot to try to make sure people do stay in their homes, both by, banning, we're putting a moratorium on evictions during this pandemic, as well as providing assistance through our homeless assistance funds in the Department of Human Services, which goes to rent payments. And then this budget actually does put quite a lot of money forward to support people in their rent payments and their mortgage payments who need it. It's much more than was there in last year's budget, for example, a multiple. And so I think that's a good start. There's no doubt, though, that what we had to do, and I think this was fair, there are a lot of people who are, they own a home, just their own home, and they may be renting out a part of that home, perhaps a duplex. And so when you say, well, gee, we're going to give a rent moratorium for the people who live in the duplex, that may be the only income that the person who owns that home has. They may be in the business of renting out a part of their own home. And so that's just one example, but there are a lot of very small owners of property who are suffering too, along with the people who live in those residences. So I just want to be clear that what we're trying to do is to find a middle ground here so that neither side is suffering the terrible effects of being evicted or not having any income at all. And that subsidization, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars, will benefit quite a lot of people.
Moving to questions from the other reporters here. Michelle Fiore, Fox 32. Governor, can you say if and when your daily report on COVID-19 will include stats on the number of new hospitalizations from the virus and the number of patients discharged who had COVID-19?
Well, we do include the first part. New hospitalizations you can watch those numbers move day to day. The discharges are really, we don't separate out discharges. We don't ask for that information specifically from the hospitals. What we do is get the total numbers of people who are filling the beds. Remember that the important part of that is we want to know about hospital capacity. Do we have the beds? Do we have the ICU beds? Do we have the ventilators available in case there's a surge in a given area? And so we're really tracking for hospital capacity as much as anything. Now, the new hospitalizations, though, are a very important number, too, because it's probably the most solid number that you can track in terms of, how are we doing at defeating the virus. the number of positive tests isn't a good way to track anymore, because we're doing so many more tests than other states that we're now reporting more cases, because we're discovering more cases because we're doing so much more testing. And so it isn't really a good way to sort of judge how's the state doing at addressing the virus. Hospitalizations, entrances into the hospital, that's probably the best thing you can watch right now.
Now, phase 3 coming soon would allow all healthcare providers to be open. Can you clarify if that includes dentists? This has been a big question. A lot of people have been curious about that. If yes, what should dental patients expect if they've had to put off going to the dentist for what was a minor toothache that has now progressed into something major? Is there anything being worked out with insurance companies to compensate for the differences in cost due to patients having to wait for those services?
I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm not going to try to, because I'm not an expert at dental procedures, but you can go to the DCEO website or to coronavirus.illinois.gov, and you will find the guidance that we've given for dental offices. It's much more open than it was, for example, in phase 1, even now. And so we do want people to get the services they need. Look, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we even opened elective surgeries. We wanted to, sometimes the word elective doesn't really describe what people need, something that's can be terribly debilitating, but isn't a heart attack or life-threatening at that moment, can still be debilitating over a long period of time if you don't get it taken care of. Same thing for something, having to do with dental procedures. So anyway, I recommend going to the website to take a look.
Moving to Rick Pearson from the Chicago Tribune. Governor, I'm curious about why the state didn't offer more relief to municipalities. I know the LGDF boost, but there's only $125 million across 1,700 municipalities, and there's $250 million in CARES Act money for coronavirus reimbursement. But what is there to prevent layoffs of first responders and other cuts due to the drop-off of local tax revenues? After all, municipalities are a creature of state government.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we need a new federal act for state and local governments. I know that Brad Cole would agree with me that if we can get the federal government to move finally, and there are bills, there's one that's passed the House, there's one that's been introduced in the Senate that will do that. That's something I've talked a lot about. I made remarks about it here today about the state, but it's also true for local governments. That package, which is for state and local governments, different than the COVID reimbursement package that passed before. This would give unrestricted dollars so that all of us, state government and local government, are able to keep the services up that people so badly need. The irony, the terrible irony, is that during a pandemic, during an emergency, your revenues go down in a state and the need goes up. And so that difference, that enormous difference, there's really only, in a global pandemic, in a national emergency, there's only one level of government that can help to fill that hole for local governments and for state governments, and that's the federal government.
Last night, Representative Tom Demmer said that this budget would only be balanced. It's relying on a wing and a prayer because of the federal government. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know if he considers his colleagues, his Republican colleagues in the Senate, the wing and the prayer. But yeah, we're relying upon them to do the right thing. For Republican-led states and Democratic-led states, this isn't something special for Illinois. It really is a problem that every state is experiencing. And so I hope that Republicans will step up here instead of simply complaining about the need that the state has to do what I've been doing and what so many others, what Dick Durbin has been doing and others, to try to get dollars from the federal government to support our state, because they're really the ones who need to come, help all 50 states.
To those that said that this is just kicking the can down the road, the same old song and dance, what do you say to that?
Well, they're just, I don't know, they're using a refrain from years gone by. That's not the case at all. But kicking the can down the road, have you ever seen a pandemic hit Illinois or the nation the way that this has? Have you ever seen a national emergency like this before? This is unprecedented, and we're all of us trying to manage through it. But here's the thing we can't do. We can't overlook our working families or the people who are most in need, who are most vulnerable, and just say, well, let's cut $5 billion. Hey, the coronavirus came along, and tough luck to people who desperately need the state government and local governments to step up to the plate and help them out. Now's the time when you need government to be there for you. So I hope that Republicans who, like Representative Demmer, will reach out to their colleagues in the U.S. Senate, the Republicans in the U.S. Senate, to do the right thing.
Mike, this will be your last one, and then we'll go to Jerry.
Absolutely. Last question coming from Heart of Illinois ABC's Kyle Beachy. The station is talking to Michelle Apple later today about sexual abuse and rape and the law named after her requiring convicted rapists to pay for the medical bills of victims. With an increase in domestic violence arrests, would you support a law requiring convicted abusers to pay for medical bills of abuse victims similar to this law?
I haven't seen the bill, so it's hard for me to comment about it. Obviously, the abusers, people who commit domestic violence, are, hold no place that's positive in anything that I think, or, in my heart. So I would, I can understand why a bill like that might be introduced, and something I would be happy to review, and, have nothing negative to say. Yeah.
Okay, Governor, I have
Jerry.
some questions on the budget, but I'm going to start with the process one. You mentioned you're not sure what you heard at 11 o'clock last night. I think in the Senate debate, I know all of us that were here can really feel that to our core, but there were a tremendous amount of wide-reaching COVID-19 measures. The budget, all of those were negotiated with working groups that didn't have any public input. You said it yourself, you don't know what you heard. We had to, just as we went, we had 4 of us reading all these bills. Is this an effective way to go through the legislative process?
Well, again, this is a highly unusual moment in the world. You've never seen a legislative session like this. I've never. And I will say that although the public wasn't able to come into hearings that the legislature had, their representatives of both sides of the aisle were, in fact, in the working groups. It wasn't a one-sided set of working groups. There were bipartisan groups working on these things. Sometimes they would ask for our input and guidance from the executive branch, and sometimes not. It's not, nobody thinks that this is a preferred way to operate, to do everything in 4 days. Indeed, I was hoping that the legislature would have gotten together much earlier. It was their choice about when. I can completely understand. You saw how many people had pre-existing conditions and either weren't able to come, or people who were just deeply concerned about coming because they were concerned about getting coronavirus. So I have great sympathy for that. It's a terrible circumstance that led to just having 4 days of session, but at least a budget went through and we were able to get a few important things done so that we can operate going forward.
Okay, my colleague Peter Hancock has wanted to know, we all know this contains $5 billion in borrowing. You said you hope we don't have to resort to that. But say the CARES Act, a second CARES Act doesn't come through, do we have a dedicated revenue stream, or do we even have a plan to pay back that?
Well, there's no doubt we're going to have to revisit the budget if the federal government doesn't come through. I think all 50 states are going to have to be revisiting their budgets if the federal government doesn't come through.
And John O'Connor, on the same subject, are you pretty certain that on top of the federal assistance, you will need to borrow the maximum $5 billion allowed from the municipal liquidity? Given the circumstances, would that count against Illinois in terms of what bond houses consider indebtedness? What's the 30-year rate on that, and doesn't it just dig us deeper?
I believe the 30-year rate is something on the order, it's certainly lower than the borrowing rate for the state of Illinois normally is. This is a Federal Reserve window, so it's, I believe, a little above 3%. I don't know the exact percentage on the borrowing, but it was necessary, and I'm glad that the MLF was available to every state, and that we're able to, it's short, I consider it short-term borrowing because my hope, again, is that the federal government will help all of the states and municipalities, so we'll be able to pay that back.
Okay. As for me, last year, Deputy Governor Dan Hines asked agencies to prepare an actionable scenario to cut up to 6.5% of their budgets. House Appropriations chairs and others have worked on scenarios where they could cut as well. We've seen an unprecedented drop in revenues.
Yes.
If you're not going to implement any of those cuts now, why even go through those practices?
Well, you're assuming that none of that is included in the cuts that were in fact made in the budget. What I would tell you is that there was a strong look at what could be cut. What could be cut. Remember, though, this is all in the frame of a vastly increased need by families, workers, individuals all across the state. And when we were looking for budget, the budget challenge and trying to balance a budget before coronavirus all came along, we were not thinking that we would have vastly increased need for rent and mortgage assistance, vastly increased need for supports for small businesses, and all the other things that we needed to do in this budget package. So, it was a very good exercise, and you saw that we did, in fact, implement hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts. Last year, we found ways to make some of the suggestions work, but in this pandemic, in this budget, as you know, we need to take care of people.
From Hannah Mizell at the Daily Line, are you going to extend your disaster proclamation when it goes up and with an altered stay-at-home order?
We're looking at how we would, we want to make sure that we can implement the Restore Illinois plan and that we're, taking care that the health and safety of the people of Illinois is paramount, so we're looking at it.
Also from Hannah, there was no vote, Republicans couldn't force a vote to check your executive authority there, but there is the commission, which is, I think, 14 lawmakers, mostly Democrats, that will report to lawmakers by July 1. How is this not going to be as useless as countless others commissions that have been enacted, especially considering most of the state could be in phase 4 by the time this commission issues its first report?
Well, the legislature has chosen not to be involved in many of the decisions that needed to be made by the executive branch. And I think, when you think about it, that's why you have an executive branch. In an emergency, I can act quickly. The executive branch can act quickly. There's no way that the legislature, you remember that week in March when we had to successively issue orders, right? When we said that people couldn't get together in large groups, when we had to close down schools, when we had to close down restaurants and bars. Those were all decisions that were being made in very quick succession. There's no way that the legislature could have been involved in that decision-making in a quick fashion. That's why you have an Emergency Management Act, and it's why you have an executive. And I would say that in the middle of an emergency and a pandemic, it's a good thing that we have emergency capability to get things done rather quickly. So, I'm in favor of working with the legislature. I just did that over the last 4 days. Indeed, I would remind everybody that for the 2.5 months or whatever up to this point, I have regularly spoken with not just the Republican and Democratic leaders, but also Republican and Democratic members of the House and the Senate. Many of them didn't mention that in their speeches on the House floor.
Right. Well, so they did mention that this budget gives you even more authority to move money around. And they say you haven't earned it. So what kind of precedent do you think you're setting with the executive power that you have right now? And would you be comfortable if Bruce Rauner was wielding that authority?
Well, no, that's why I ran against him and beat him. Here's the thing. This talk about earning the authority. Nobody knew a pandemic was coming along. there's just no way that anybody had any clue that we would be in this situation that we're in right now. And I would do anything, give anything to not be in this situation, to not have this virus attacking people all across our nation. But here we are. So I think that there's a recognition anyway that we're going to have an unusual year here. Things are not going to be going back to normal as people know them soon. We're trying to get back to as much normal as we can, but as I've said, I mean, you all came in here wearing face coverings, I presume not just because it's required in the Capitol right now, but because you know it's good for you for your own health as you go out and venture out in the world. I think we all understand that. There are lots of things that all of us are doing that are quite unusual, and I think it's going to stay that way for some time. So I'm going to try very hard to operate as I have, by the way, with transparency, letting everybody know what we're doing, and also why we're doing it. And the biggest thing is listening to the science and the data to make the decisions that we're making.
Gary, I'll give you one more and then we'll go online.
Okay. You said you'd be very disappointed if lawmakers don't pass a bill allowing for small fines for disobeying your orders. They didn't. Is there another emergency rule coming? And is there any point to such an extra rule if we're going to be in phase 3 in 5 days?
I am very disappointed. I think it was a complete abdication of responsibility on the part of the legislature. Look, it was the director of the Illinois State Police. It was the Illinois State Police that asked for this enforcement authority. None of us want to exercise the ability to take away somebody's license that's been given to them by the state to do business. Nobody wants to shut down a business. What we were looking for is a way to issue a citation. That really was what the director of the state police asked for. And we left it to the legislature to decide what that citation would be. And I was hopeful and expectant that they would deliver to me a bill that said that. But they were unwilling to vote on anything like that, or they didn't get it done. And so we're going to have to look at other mechanisms. But the fact is that I think the legislature failed in this regard.
All right, we'll go to questions from online. Shio from Politico wants to know what you would like to see brought up during veto session.
Oh my gosh. I don't think I've projected that far in advance.
She also has a follow-up question about if you can comment on the Justice Department opposing Illinois stay-at-home order.
Well, I mean, it's been clear that the White House and the Attorney General have turned this into some sort of political attack against Democratic governors. But the fact is that, my uppermost concern and consideration is the health and safety of the people of our state. And as you've seen, I think I've operated with transparency and also with a desire to move things forward so people can get more back to normal. The idea that they would intervene in a case in this state as opposed to some other state is, I think, for others to speculate why. But again, I think there's a lot of politics involved.
Tony Arnold at WBEZ. After watching some highly partisan debates take place the last 4 days, do you think Springfield is as polarized as Washington?
I do not. I know that there were many Republicans who stood up and they were on the attack. There were, one or two from an area of the state, southeastern area of the state, that were particularly vitriolic, both outside the Capitol and inside the Capitol, or at least the session. But I have to tell you, I talk to Republicans all the time, individually, directly, and even some who stood up and, and they were playing to the crowd at home by attacking and turning it into something partisan. Honestly, when I talk to them individually, they just are concerned for the people in their districts, and they're trying to express the anxiety that I think people are experiencing. We all are. This virus is still out there. We still haven't figured out, nobody has, how to defeat it. The researchers are doing their best, but we are going to have to live with this for some time. And, it has different effect on different people across the state in terms of just their mindset. But I do not believe that Illinois is as divided a state as the rest of the nation is. And I have believed that from day one. I think all of you have seen I've worked across the aisle every day that I've been in office. Sometimes we disagree. Sometimes I take a position and they've got the opposite position. That's politics. But the truth is we all have the best interests of the people of the state in mind. So I think we're in a pretty good position to continue to work together going forward.
All right, I think we reached all the questions online.
From Greg Bishop.
Yeah, this will be our last question.
Greg says if public health is paramount, why not let Illinois courts expedite an outcome in challenges to your authority instead of delaying the outcomes by moving the venue to federal court? And what's your response to the DOJ saying Representative Bailey has a strong case that you are exceeding your authority?
Well, the Judiciary aren't experts at public health. Taking these things to court doesn't resolve the public health matter. Listening to the science and the data, that's completely different than, taking your political position to a court to try to have it resolved by someone who's been elected as a judge. So that's my response.
All right, thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.